Hello and welcome to Awaz News. I'm Kubra Ali and I'll be taking you through big news across Canada.
Ontario declared a state of emergency over the COVID-19 pandemic 3 years ago today. Here is a look back. Maple syrup weather, Toronto to see mix of freezing and mild temperatures as spring begins. Ontario proposing legislation protecting civilian jobs of injured military reservists. Man seriously injured in Etobicoke stabbing. Inflation is easing, but Ottawa faces pressure to help those who have fallen behind. Maple syrup weather, Toronto to see mix of freezing and mild temperatures as spring begins.
These were the headlines and let's jump right into the details.
The Ontario government is proposing legislation that would give military reservists new protections guaranteeing they can return to their civilian jobs after recovering from the physical or mental injuries. Labour Minister Monty McNaughton is expected to make the announcement Friday morning alongside retired General Rick Hillier. Speaking to Awaz News Toronto, ahead of the announcement, McNaughton said the legislation is meant to send the message to employers that these jobs will be there for military reservists when they are deployed abroad or responding to a natural disaster. The men and women who serve in uniform are heroes and they defend freedom abroad, and they also can help with natural disasters here in Ontario and across the country, McNaughton said. Officials say that of the 40,000 soldiers in Afghanistan, nearly 1 in 7 deployed a mental injury as a result of their deployment. In addition, the Ontario government is also proposing regulations that will allow reservists to respond to domestic emergencies such as search and rescue operations and natural disasters such as floods or ice storms immediately rather than waiting until their months-long employment probationary period is over. McNaughton said this will provide reservists immediate job protection if there is a need for their services in Canada. The legislation builds on protections put in place last year that ensure deployed or training reservists could not be fired during their absences from their civilian jobs. Officials say that 1 in 10 of Canadian armed forces' 100,000 positions remain unfilled. Canada's inflation rate likely took another dip last month, but with many Canadians still struggling with the cost of living, the federal government is facing pressure to deliver more help in the upcoming budget. Statistics Canada is set to release its February Consumer Price Index report on Tuesday, giving its most up-to-date reading on inflation ahead of the federal government's budget on March 28. Desjardins and RBC are both forecasting the inflation rate fell to 5.4% last month, down from 5.9% in the January. But even as inflation eases, the federal government has signaled the budget will include affordability measures to help Canadians still challenged by the cost of living. Desjardins chief economist Jimmy Jean said all eyes are on Ottawa to balance affordability priorities with fiscal restraint. The Bank of Canada has been laser-focused on bringing inflation back down to its 2% target. Its aggressive rate hike cycle over the last year starting to slow the economy by forcing people and businesses to pull back on spending. As the economy slows, economists worry excessive or untargeted measures by the federal government could work against the central bank's efforts and force it to raise interest rates even higher. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has said repeatedly that she's committed to fiscal restraint and ensuring the federal government doesn't make the Bank of Canada's job harder. But the Liberals are also facing pressure from the New Democrats to continue providing support for low-income Canadians who are hardest hit by inflation. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said he is wants to see the government extend the 6-month boost to GST rebate introduced last fall, which temporarily doubled the amount people received. At a news conference Wednesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't weigh in on whether his government would extend the rebate, but said the budget will include affordability measures. Inflation has become a top political and economic concern in the country after a significant run-up in prices last year, driven in the part of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and mangled supply chains. But since peaking at 8.1% last summer, Canada's inflation rate has been steadily declining as global pressures on inflation ease and high interest rates weigh on the economy. Jean said lower gas prices last month likely drove the headline inflation rate down further. Other components of the CPI, like food prices, probably didn't ease by much. Grocery prices in January were a staggering 11.4% higher than they were a year ago. The Bank of Canada is currently holding its key interest rate steady at 4.5%, hoping inflation will ease without the need for more rate hikes. It's forecasting inflation will fall to about 3% by mid-year. For workers who haven't seen their wages keep up with the inflation, the rapid rise has been especially punishing. But as inflation slows, the gap between the two is narrowing. In February, average hourly wages were up 5.4%, matching forecasts for inflation. The Bank of Canada has said persistently strong wage growth will make getting back to the 2% inflation target difficult. For workers, Jean said the narrowing gap between inflation and wage growth is good news but doesn't make up for what they have lost. Maple syrup weather, that's what Environment Canada senior climatologist Dave Phillips says that residents can expect as spring officially gets underway on Monday. It is often said that spring arrives reluctantly in Canada as this is going to test us, Phillips told Awaz News. This is going to be slow coming. Every day will be marginally warmer. But the cold still may come. In Toronto, after the first day of spring, we still get about 10% of our annual snowfall, so don't put away your snow shovel. Patient is the operative word. Phillips said that the winter was much warmer than normal in Toronto, with the city only seeing 11 days in which the temperature dipped to minus 10 degrees Celsius or below compared to the 38 it sees in more typical year. But he said the March has brought much colder conditions and there is a risk that weather will linger the remainder of the month. The forecast for this weekend in fact calls for temperatures to only reach a high of minus 2 Celsius on Saturday and 1 Celsius on Sunday, but the temperature overnight into Saturday could feel closer to minus 11 with the wind chill. Flurries are also possible for Saturday morning. Spring will officially arrive at 5:24 p.m. on Monday. Environment Canada is currently calling for sunny skies and high of 5 Celsius on Monday to mark the milestone. Temperatures will drop to freezing overnight but then climb back up to 4 Celsius on Tuesday. The average daytime high at this time of the year is about 4 Celsius with an average low of minus 4.8 Celsius. It is going to go from slush to sweat, Phillips said. A man has been seriously injured in stabbing in Etobicoke, police say. It happened at a residence in the area of Dixon Road and Kipling Avenue just after 10:30 p.m. Police say the victim has been transported to hospital with serious injuries. Toronto paramedics say they took a second victim, a woman, to a local hospital with minor injuries. Police have not released information on the possible suspect. While the deadline to file your taxes is getting closer, there are some personal tax credits people in Ontario may qualify for. Today is the best time to start putting all your papers together, and that way you will be sure you don't forget anything. HR Block Tax Specialist Yannick Lemay told Awaz News. Often what we see in practice is that the credits that get forgotten are those that people need to search for slips, they need to search for receipts. Lemay brought up Ontario's staycation tax credit as an example. Through this credit, Ontarians who have stayed in a hotel or rented a cottage in the province can claim 20% of eligible accommodation expenses between January 1st and December 31st, 2022. Families and couples can claim up to $2,000 and get a maximum credit of $400. Lemay pointed to the Ontario Seniors Care at the Home Tax Credit, which can help low to moderate income seniors with eligible medical expenses. Seniors who are 70 years old or older can write off up to 25% of their medical expenses and can claim up to $6,000 or a maximum of $1,500 in return. There is also the Child Care Access and Relief from Expenses Care Tax Credit, which helps families with a household income of $150,000 or less. Eligible families may be able to claim up to 75% of childcare expenses, including childcare centers and camps. While there are personal income tax credits, Lemay says there are also deductions that Ontarians will want to keep in mind. Anyone who has moved to be closer to work or school might be able to claim their moving expenses, he said. According according to the federal government, if your new home is at least 40 kilometers closer to a new job than your previous home was, you can be eligible for moving expenses deduction. Lima also noted those who have investments outside the registered accounts, like their tax-free savings, TFSA, or registered retirement savings plan or RSP, can deduct management fees. May 1st is the deadline for the most Canadians to file their tax returns, with June 15 being the deadline for those who are self-employed. It's now been 3 years since Ontario declared a state of emergency over the COVID-19 pandemic. Back on March 17, 2020, it was thought that restrictions to flatten the curve would last for just a few weeks and extended March break. Little did most people realize then that the pandemic would lead to on and off restrictions for more than 2 years, leave thousands dead, and rock daily life to its core for millions of people in province and around the world. While Ontario saw a relative return to normal for much of 2022, and so far this year, society is continuing to grapple with the effects of the pandemic, from remote work to supply shortages to massive municipal revenue losses. And while the virus itself is no longer threatening to overwhelm hospitals, it remains a real health threat for many people. COVID is still here. It absolutely is. It has not gone away. Infectious disease specialist Dr. Isaac Bogoj told CP24 in conversation about the 3-year anniversary Thursday, and COVID continues to disproportionately impact older Canadians and Canadians that have underlying medical conditions that put them at great risk for more severe infection. Bogoj said the vaccination campaign got much more complicated after second doses, and there remain communities that are under-vaccinated. In general, he said people over 60 or those with underlying medical conditions should get a shot if they haven't had one in the past 6 months. While the virus hasn't gone away, Ontario has come a long way since declaring an emergency because of the pandemic when it first emerged.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm Kubra Ali. I'll see you back tomorrow, same time, same channel. Have a good night.